talk about another podcast episode. So let me bring up Microsoft Word and share it here. And today's episode is about small gestures. Now, if you know anything about me, and most of you don't, I don't go out much unless I have to. In this world of getting everything delivered, it's much easier to do that. So, um, you can think of me as, I don't know, Howard Hughes without all that money to screw things up. Anyway, I had to go out the other day, and it was an interesting experience because I didn't expect what happened at the end of my trip. I had to go over to the local cable store. And I went over there with a friend, and the friend was taking care of something, and I was kind of there to share information and make the whole process easier. Anyway, he was taking care of what he was needed to do at the counter, and I was sitting in the little waiting area, which actually was only about 2 feet from the counter. So both of us were interacting with the salesperson or the customer representative, but I was interacting with another group, and that's what this podcast episode is all about. So I call it the Day of the Small Gestures, and let's turn on dictation and try to get some of these words down just as they come out. They're not going to be edited. This is only a first draft, and with a first draft, you don't worry about editing a whole lot. So we'll go up here, because I use voice recognition, and there we go. Okay, period. So I don't go out much unless I really have to go out. Period. But sometimes it's unavoidable. Period. My recent outing was one of those times. Period. You see, I had a friend who had to do something over at the local cable store, and I had to be there to share some information. Because I'm kind of a techie. I'm kind of a techie at heart. Period. Anyway, while he was at the counter talking to the customer representative, I was sitting on a comfortable couch about 2 feet away. Period. Okay, so now what we've done is we've set up the podcast. I know there's stuff that's going to be edited out and stuff that's going to be changed, but basically we've set up the premise. But as with all of my podcasts, what eventually ends up is not what starts out. So you can expect the story to change as things go on. And that's what you're doing for your readers. You're telling them a story. Now, in this case, I'm writing this for an oral presentation. I'm going to record it. But if you're writing something, anything, whether it's that great American novel you've always wanted to write, or a blog that talks about something you're interested in, or maybe a magazine article, which is what I spent most of my professional career doing. Um, you're always writing for the reader. You're not writing for yourself. Now, you can find your own voice. It took me a few years to do that. Uh, when I first came out of college, I didn't have my voice. I had my teachers and my professors' voices in my head. And quite frankly, it was pretty crowded. In fact, funny story, my first magazine piece, and I won't go into how I managed to obtain that job. Um, but my first magazine piece was to write an article about a gaming group from England. I was living in LA and I had made a connection who publicized this group, and we arranged to meet, and I shared that arrangement with the editor of the gambling magazine on spec. And anyway, I won't go into the details of what happened. That'll be for another podcast, but another podcast episode of the Writer's Life podcast. But after the interview was over, I went home and I proceeded to write the article about this gaming group in England. And I delivered it over to the editor. And a few days later, I received the article back in the mail. Uh, those were the days before email. I received the article back in the mail, and written across the top in the infamous red pencil that all editors keep with them at all times was the word sophomoric, underlined with an exclamation point. Now, I believed I had done everything right. I had done everything that my teachers had taught me to do at the University of Arizona. And I didn't even know what sophomoric meant. So I grabbed my handy dandy Webster's dictionary and looked up the word sophomoric. Found out in essence it meant of or relating to a sophomore in college. In other words, he was telling me that my writing wasn't professional. It was amateur. Well, when you're writing for a national magazine, you can't be an amateur, even if it's your first job. So I looked at it, and that word sophomoric kept hitting me in the face, and I decided to take a risk. I had nothing to lose. He wasn't going to run the article. And I still had a great interview. So I rewrote the article. I convinced him to let me rewrite the article. And I rewrote it the way I would have written it had I never gone to school. Now, I have to say that I'm not saying that going to school didn't teach me anything. It did. It taught me structure. It taught me how to put together a sentence that actually sounded coherent, because what I thought was good writing before was not good writing uh, during or after I went to college. And it helped me to tighten up my writing and to make it more readable. But what it also did, because I became so ingrained with the rules that I had learned, is it made it mechanical. And structurally, it was perfect, or close to perfect. I'm not going to say perfect. But I wasn't writing for the reader, I was writing for myself. And that was the mistake. So, anyway, I sat down and rewrote the article in my voice, or my voice at the time. The voice I have now is an evolved version of that, very much evolved from that. That was kind of like baby steps compared to what it is now. And I sent it to him. And as a result, I ended up being a feature writer for that magazine and writing a column for the next 2 years because I showed him that I was a writer, not just regurgitating what I had learned in journalism school. Because being a writer isn't just rules and regulations. Being a writer is, again, writing for your readers, not yourself. And I hadn't done that in the first article. I had written for myself. In the second attempt at that article, I had written for the reader, and that's what he wanted to see. In fact, I left the magazine after 2 years to pursue another direction, which pretty much was the rest of my career. I became a feature writer for several magazines, specializing in celebrity profiles. Um, but 25 years later, they asked me to write an article for their 25th anniversary issue, which I was honored to do. I was kind of pleased that they had asked me. Anyway, so that's the deal. That's what you're writing for. And so we're going to get back to this article, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what happened that was totally unexpected. New paragraph. So there I was, and I was periodically answering questions while a big screen TV was in front of me, playing some food, some chef contest. I'm not sure what the show was because I don't watch much television. I don't watch much television, comma. But I wasn't alone. There were several other customers around, and one customer had several children with him around the ages of 4 to 5 years, period. There was also a big, round, huge, I should say, round, padded ottoman right in front of us, period. Anyway, kids being kids, they were burning off energy, period. That's when they noticed me, period. Now, now, comma, I should say, they didn't notice me as much as my crutches. Period. I'm handicapped and I need those crutches to get around. Period. And I heard the question that I've heard so many times in my life. Period. In fact, I've spoken about it in some of the other podcast episodes. Period. It's the infamous question, comma, comma, what happened to you? Question mark. Well, comma, you can't tell 4 or 5 year olds what actually happened to you because they don't understand, and quite frankly, that's not what they want to hear. Period. The other part of this is that hang on, I want to kind of split this up. I'm not thinking too much of paragraphs or proper grammatical structure. But let's split this up a little just so I can see it. Um, it helps me to see what I'm talking about. And that's another thing. In this first part, we're not looking for proper grammar or structure or anything like that. We're just getting our thoughts down. This is a very rough draft. I will take this when it is completed and probably do 2 or 3 or maybe 4 revisions before I get a final script that I record. The final script will be around 1,000 to 1,200 words. That's about 8 minutes, which is where I'm trying to keep my podcast length. And believe it or not, even with some of the mistakes that are in there, we got 289 words. I would say we have about 250 words. We're a quarter of the way there. And we may not finish it in this session, but at least you'll get the idea. Okay, so back to the dictation. You want to tell them something that doesn't frighten them or make them feel uncomfortable. Frighten them or make them feel uncomfortable. Period. I have a very good reason for doing this. Period. They know that I'm not like them because they can see it. Period. If I make them feel uncomfortable, comma, they will feel uncomfortable whenever they come across a similar situation. Period. Make no mistake about it, comma. they will come across similar situations. And they will either learn to avoid those people or treat them as they would treat anyone else. Period. So I looked at the small boy who asked me that and said, I hurt my foot. Period. He asked the obvious question of how I hurt my foot. And I just said I don't remember because it happened a really long time ago. Period. Anyway, they were fascinated by my crutches. By my crutches. Period. They started playing with them. And I let them. And I let them. Period. They couldn't hurt them, and more importantly, they couldn't hurt themselves. Period. So now they were having a fun time between sliding across the ottoman and racing around the waiting area with my crutches. Period. And they would periodically bring them back. I should say, one of the boys would periodically bring them back, at which point his brother would start using them. Period. They were having a good time. Period. They weren't hurting anybody or anything. And I saw no reason to stop them. Their parents were nearby, and fortunately, they didn't find any reason to stop them either, as long as I was giving my okay. Now, I know this looks like a run on sentence, and it is. It's actually 3 or 4 sentences in one, but I'm not worrying about punctuation. As I said, right now I'm just getting my thoughts down. I can go back and break it up and do the proper punctuation and everything else. But when you're a storyteller, you want to tell a story that keeps people involved. And to my mind, and some people may disagree with me, telling that story that keeps people involved is all about telling a story that isn't grammatically correct. You're not reading a speech. You're not writing a paper. You're telling a story. And if you think back to the stories you've told your friends or your family or anyone, if you were to write them down as you related that story, you would find that It's not grammatically correct, but it does keep their interest. And what I'm trying to do is keep the reader's interest, in this case, the listener's interest. But since I'm also going to transcribe these podcasts into text for the hard of hearing, it is the reader's interest. And that makes it even more difficult because I have to make the story as interesting on paper as I make it when I'm speaking, because I can't use inflection. I can't use pauses. I can't do any of that the hard of hearing would not hear. So I have to make the story interesting on paper. If I can make it interesting on paper, it will be interesting in the podcast, even with inflection and pauses and the timbre of my voice and everything else that goes along with it. So, in effect, even though I'm doing a podcast, I'm writing a story. And that is basically what I'm trying to get across with Writing 101 with the writer. You're writing a story for the readers, not for yourself. So anyway, we're going to stop this here, and I will get back to this at some point in the very near future. I may do it on stream or I may do it off stream, but you will eventually see and hear the final result by going to theyearofmylife.com and clicking on the Writer's Podcasts. This is going to be part of the Writer's Life podcast. There are 23 episodes. Let me just show you quickly what the website looks like. We'll stop sharing this. You get my big head. We'll start sharing again. And we're going to click on this and share. And here we go. And this is not what I wanted. Okay, I picked the wrong one. I picked my Patreon page. Anyway, if you go to thewriterslife.com, let's stop sharing this. We'll go back to my big head very quickly. If you go to the writerslife.com, you will see the website. Go to the Writers Podcast and listen to it, and you'll get an idea of what I mean. Until we meet again, be good to yourself, be good to everyone you meet, and take care. Bye-bye.